On a pouring, rainy Tuesday morning, a desperate single father shoved a crumpled $20 bill into a stranger's hand and gently pushed his 5-year-old daughter toward her. "Please watch her for 10 minutes. I really can't miss this interview." He had no idea. The woman he just left his little girl with was the powerful chairwoman who had just fired half her executive team upstairs. The rain came down in heavy sheets that Tuesday morning, turning the city streets into rivers and filling the air with the constant roar of water crashing against concrete and glass. Umbrellas flipped inside out, and people hurried past with their heads down, trying to escape the sudden storm. Alden Brooks gripped his 5-year-old daughter Millie's small hand tightly as they rushed toward the towering glass building of Orion Technology. His only decent suit jacket was already soaked through at the shoulders, clinging uncomfortably to his skin. Just 30 minutes earlier, the babysitter had canceled with a frantic phone call, leaving him with no choice but to bring Millie along to the most important job interview of his life. This interview was everything. It was the last real chance to stop the bank from taking their small apartment. For weeks, Alden had stayed up late after putting Millie to bed, practicing answers and polishing his resume. He could not afford to fail today. They burst through the revolving doors into the grand lobby. The warm, dry air inside felt like another world. Alden's heart was racing. He scanned the lobby desperately for anyone who looked like they might work for the company's on-site childcare service, the one he had called in a panic on the way here. In the farthest, quietest corner of the lobby, a woman sat alone. She wore a simple gray sweater and dark trousers, her shoulders slightly hunched as she stared at the marble floor. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. To Alden, in his rush and desperation, she looked exactly like the person he had been waiting for. Without thinking twice, he hurried over. Millie clutched her white, rabbit-shaped backpack against her chest, looking up at her father with wide, trusting eyes. Alden pulled a crumpled $20 bill from his pocket and pressed it into the woman's hand, along with the little backpack. His voice came out fast and breathless. "Please, watch her for just 10 minutes. I really can't miss this interview. I'll be right back. Thank you so much." Before the woman could say a single word, Alden knelt down quickly, kissed the top of Millie's wet hair, and whispered, "Be good for the nice lady, sweetheart. Daddy will be back very soon." Then he stood up and ran towards the elevator, his wet shoes squeaking on the polished floor. The doors slid shut behind him, carrying him up to the 42nd floor. In the suddenly quiet corner of the lobby, Sloane Whitaker sat frozen, the $20 bill and the rabbit backpack still in her hands. She had come down here to escape the suffocating boardroom, where she had just dismantled half her executive team for betraying her trust. Her chest still felt tight from the panic that had gripped her moments earlier. Now, a 5-year-old girl with curious eyes and a dripping raincoat stood in front of her, holding onto the straps of her little backpack and tilting her head. Sloane, the powerful chairwoman of Orion Technology, who commanded thousands of employees with a single calm sentence, had no idea what to do next. Sloane Whitaker sat completely still, as if someone had pressed pause on the entire world. In her right hand was a crumpled $20 bill. In her left was a small white rabbit backpack, still slightly damp from the rain. And right in front of her stood a 5-year-old girl named Millie, looking up with big, curious eyes. For a woman who had spent years commanding boardrooms, firing executives, and closing multi-million-dollar deals, Sloane suddenly felt utterly powerless. She had no script for this, no agenda, no assistant to call for help. Just a little girl and an awkward silence that stretched longer with every passing second. Millie did not cry. She did not seem scared. Instead, she climbed onto the soft leather chair beside Sloane, opened her little backpack, and pulled out a small box of cookies. She offered one to Sloane without saying a word. Sloane hesitated, then took the cookie. Her fingers felt clumsy around the tiny treat. Millie took a bite of her own cookie and tilted her head. After a moment, she spoke in a soft, matter-of-fact voice. "You're holding your breath the same way my daddy does when he's trying to hide that he's really sad." The words hit Sloane harder than any boardroom confrontation ever had. She felt her chest tighten again, but this time it was different. This time, a child had seen straight through the armor she had worn for years. Sloane exhaled slowly. How do you know that?" Millie shrugged her small shoulders. "I just know. When grown-ups get really quiet and their eyes look far away, it means they have a big sadness inside. Daddy says it's okay to feel sad. He says the best thing is to share a cookie and talk about it." A tiny smile almost reached Sloane's lips. She, who had spent the last hour dismantling an entire leadership team for their betrayal, was now sitting in a lobby being gently disarmed by a 5-year-old. Millie opened her drawing book and began coloring with bright crayons. She pushed a blue crayon toward Sloane. "Can you help me color the sky? It has to be the right kind of blue. Not too dark, because even when it rains, the sky still wants to be happy." Sloane stared at the crayon for a second, then slowly picked it up. She sat down on the thick carpet beside the chair, something she had not done in more than 15 years. Using the same sharp strategic mind that had built Orion technology, she began helping Millie with the drawing, carefully choosing colors and listening as the little girl explained why broccoli tastes like outside rain and why clouds sometimes look like angry dragons. For the first time in years, Sloane was not giving orders. She was not negotiating. She was simply listening. And in that quiet, unexpected conversation, something inside her long, frozen heart began to thaw. The powerful chairwoman who could silence a room full of millionaires with one calm sentence found herself completely captivated by a child's innocent world. Every laugh from Millie, every simple question, chipped away at the cold walls Sloane had built around herself to survive at the top. She did not call security. She did not try to hand the child off to someone else. Instead, she stayed right there on the lobby floor, building a small paper cup castle with Millie, and feeling, for the first time in a very long time, strangely and wonderfully human. Up on the 42nd floor, the atmosphere inside the interview room was completely different from the warm lobby below. The rain continued to beat against the tall glass windows, but inside, the air felt cold and heavy with judgment. Alden sat across from 2 mid-level managers. Both men wore sharp suits and carried the confident smiles of people who believed they held all the power. They glanced at Alden's damp shoes and his slightly wrinkled suit jacket with barely hidden disapproval. The interview began politely enough, but it quickly turned tense. One of the managers leaned back in his chair and slid a thick folder across the table. "We've had a major logistics problem in our warehouse system for the past 6 weeks," he said. "Thousands of orders delayed, millions in potential losses. Solve it." Alden did not panic. He did not try to impress them with big words. Instead, he stood up quietly, picked up a black marker, and walked to the large whiteboard. With steady, confident strokes, he drew a clear flow chart of the entire data stream. He pointed out the exact bottleneck that no one had noticed before. a single flawed step in the process that was quietly breaking everything else. In less than 10 minutes, he offered a simple but elegant solution that would fix the root cause, not just treat the symptoms. The two managers exchanged surprised glances. For a moment, the room fell silent. Even they could see the brilliance in Alden's approach. But then the tone shifted. The taller manager leaned forward, a smirk forming on his lips. "Impressive on paper," he said. "But let's be realistic. You're a single father, correct? That means sudden emergencies, school runs, sick days. Family obligations tend to get in the way of real commitment. And quite honestly, bills don't pay themselves." Alden stood very still for a few seconds. His jaw tightened, but he did not raise his voice. He did not argue or defend himself. The old pain of raising Millie alone after losing his wife flashed through his mind, but he pushed it down. He simply gathered his papers with calm hands, looked the two men in the eyes, and spoke with quiet dignity. "I appreciate the opportunity, but my daughter will always come first. If that makes me unsuitable for this role, then I understand." Without another word, Alden turned and walked toward the door. He had chosen his daughter over the job that could have saved their home. There was no anger in his steps, only the steady, unbreakable resolve of a father who had learned that some things in life were more important than any paycheck. Meanwhile, back in the lobby, the quiet laughter between Sloane and Millie continued. Two completely different worlds were unfolding at the same time. One filled with cold calculation and fragile egos, the other filled with crayons, paper cups, and innocent honesty. Alden had no idea that the woman he had left his daughter with upstairs was about to change everything. Alden stepped out of the elevator and hurried back into the lobby, his heart pounding with worry. He had been gone longer than 10 minutes. What if Millie was crying? What if the woman had grown impatient and left her alone? But as he rounded the corner, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, on the soft carpet in the quiet corner of the lobby, sat his daughter Millie, laughing brightly, her small hands clapping with joy. She was sitting comfortably on the woman's lap, and together they were building an elaborate castle out of paper cups and colorful straws. Millie's rabbit backpack lay open beside them, crayons scattered everywhere. For a moment, Alden could not speak. The scene looked so peaceful, so unexpectedly warm. Before he could say anything, he heard footsteps behind him. The two managers from the interview room had followed him down, still wearing their smug expressions. One of them called out loudly, "Mr. Brooks, we're not finished with you yet. Running off like that only proves our point about reliability." Alden turned, ready to apologize quickly and take Millie home. He reached into his pocket for a few more bills to thank the woman for her trouble. But then the taller manager froze. His face went pale as he stared at the woman sitting on the floor with Millie. "Chairwoman Sloane?" he stammered, his voice cracking. I mean, Madam Chairwoman, what are you doing here?" The second manager's folder slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a loud slap. Alden stood frozen, his mind struggling to catch up. Chairwoman? The same woman he had mistaken for a babysitter? Sloane did not stand up immediately. She remained seated on the carpet, calmly placing the final paper cup on top of the little castle she and Millie had built. Only after the tower was steady did she gently lift Millie onto the chair beside her and rise with quiet grace. She turned toward the two managers. Her voice was calm, measured, and carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had spent years making decisions that moved millions. "The warehouse logistics problem that has been stuck for 6 weeks," she said slowly, "was solved by this man in less than 10 minutes. Yet you chose to reject him because he is a single father who puts his daughter first? The lobby grew deathly silent. The two managers stood speechless, their faces drained of color. Sloane looked directly at them, her tone remaining perfectly even. Effective immediately, both of you are no longer with this company. She paused for a brief moment, then turned to Alden. Her expression softened, and for the first time, a gentle warmth appeared in her eyes. As for you, Alden, I watched how you solved that problem on the whiteboard upstairs. I saw the quiet strength you carry every single day as a father. The way you chose your daughter even when it cost you everything. She took one step closer. I don't need people who shout the loudest. I need people who think clearly and care deeply. Would you like to lead the operations team? And do it your way? Alden stood there, completely stunned. The woman he had desperately handed his daughter and $20 to, the woman who had just spent the last hour building a paper cup castle with Millie, was the chairwoman of Orion Technology. In that quiet moment, with rain still falling softly outside the tall glass windows, two completely different worlds had collided, and nothing would ever be the same again. The following Saturday morning brought a gentle sunlight into Alden's small apartment kitchen. There were no fancy offices, no board meetings, and no expensive cars waiting outside. Just the simple smell of pancakes cooking on an old stove and the sound of quiet laughter filling the air. Sloane Whitaker stood awkwardly at the counter, wearing a casual sweater and jeans she had clearly never worn to work. Flour dusted her sleeves, and a small streak of batter marked her cheek. Millie, standing on a wooden step stool beside her, was happily showing the powerful chairwoman how to pour the perfect circle of batter. "Like this, Miss Sloane," Millie said with a big smile. "Not too fast, or it becomes a funny shape." Sloane laughed softly, a sound she had almost forgotten how to make. She carefully poured the batter, her movements still a little uncertain, but her eyes were warm and relaxed. For the first time in many years, she was not rushing. She was not in control of anything except this moment. Alden leaned against the doorway, watching the two of them with a quiet smile. The woman who once commanded an entire corporation now looked completely at home in his humble kitchen, learning from his 5-year-old daughter how to make pancakes. No grand job offers were announced that morning. No dramatic life changes were declared. Instead, the three of them simply sat together at the small wooden table, eating slightly imperfect pancakes drizzled with maple syrup. The invisible wall that had once separated their worlds had quietly melted away in the warmth of shared laughter and ordinary kindness. Later, as Millie played with her crayons at the table, Sloane looked across at Alden and spoke softly. "Thank you for trusting me with your daughter that day, and for reminding me what really matters." Alden nodded gently. "And thank you for seeing me, not just as a single father, but as someone who still has something valuable to give." In that peaceful kitchen, power, money, and status no longer defined them. They were simply three people sharing a quiet morning, connected by one unexpected rainy day and the honest heart of a little girl.
You, my dear friends, have just experienced an original fiction story from QH Incredible Stories, crafted with care from the heart. Though the characters are imagined, the feelings of exhaustion that a single father carries in the rain and the deep loneliness that can hide at the very top of success, those are feelings many of us know too well. This story carries a gentle reminder. We often measure power by loud voices, high titles, and large numbers, but the most beautiful power is quiet. It lives in the father who chooses his child even when it costs him everything. It lives in the woman strong enough to sit on the floor and listen to a 5-year-old's world. True kindness is never a risk. It is the greatest investment we can ever make. Thank you for spending this time with us. If this story touched your heart, please let us know in the comments. We'll continue bringing you these healing stories every week.